This is the Ellis Martin Report and Money Talk Radio. Today I'm joined by Craig Lindsay, CEO of U.S. Operations for Resolution Minerals, trading on the ASX as RML and in the U.S. on the OTCQB as RLMLF. Resolution recently acquired the Horse Heaven project in Idaho, a polymetallic asset with gold, antimony, tungsten, and silver, all strategically critical in today's global market. With Idaho ranked as one of the top mining jurisdictions in the U.S. and with infrastructure advantages from the neighboring Perpetua Stibnite Mine, Resolution is positioning itself at the center of the domestic supply chain for both precious and critical minerals. Craig, welcome back to the program. Great to visit with you today.
Ellis, fantastic to be here.
Fantastic news. You've been asked, and by you I mean you and Resolution Minerals, have been asked by the ambassador to the U.S. from Australia, Dr. Kevin Rudd, to brief him on the company ahead of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's meeting with President Trump in just a few days on October 20th. How exciting is that?
Fantastic. I got to tell you, Ambassador Rudd is a former Prime Minister of Australia, and it's not often I wake up to an email from a former Prime Minister looking for some input from me on anything, Ellis. Yeah, it was exciting.
Now, they're specifically interested in the Horse Heaven project, which hosts gold, antimony, and tungsten. I imagine antimony is on the tip of President Trump's tongue, as it is with Prime Minister Albanese and Dr. Rudd.
Absolutely. This really falls on the heels of the United States imports 100% of its antimony right now. 90% of that market, of course, is controlled by, I think, China and Russia. China has cut off supplies of antimony to the United States. So the U.S. government has really been focused since the beginning of the year and the new administration coming in on identifying domestic sources of supply for these critical metals. Horse Heaven in Idaho can play a critical role in that, no pun intended, because our project is a past producer of both antimony and tungsten. It's a high-grade resource. It's got excellent infrastructure. It's right next door to the Perpetua mine. So I think it was logical that the government came to us to seek a little bit of input from us. And there are other Australian companies operating in the critical metal sector in the U.S. Nova up in Alaska has received about $44 million from the U.S. government to develop their project. That's a $300 to $400 million market cap company. Trig has a project in the U.S. Loxley has one in California near Mountain Pass. So there's a lot of interest from Australian companies in investing in critical metals. So it's not just Resolution, but it's an exciting time, and it's good to be recognized and included in this request for background information on what these Australian companies are doing.
Trilogy just received a 10% equity stake from the U.S. government in their Alaska project. Our government and the Australian government, and in part the Canadian government, is very active in the space.
They really are, and it's logical. I think I can't speak to a lot of this stuff in detail of why, say, the Australians and the Canadian governments are interested in this from a U.S. perspective, but I think it's largely around these trade discussions that are going on and how can other companies help out the United States meet some of these critical metals issues, possibly in exchange for offsetting wins on trade negotiations and that sort of thing. And that seems a logical reason for the interest, Ellis.
What are the next steps for the company right now?
A couple of things. The two critical things from a U.S. perspective and addressing critical metal supply, in my opinion, permitting, number one, and reducing permitting timelines. That's exploration, that's development, it's mining of metals, and it's the processing. So if we can reduce those permitting timelines, that's going to be a critical conversation point for the Australian and the U.S. government around critical metals. The second thing we feel from a Resolution Minerals perspective is the concept of establishing critical metals hubs. So these are places where you would process critical metals ore off-site in a centralized location. It would allow smaller projects to get into production faster, projects that couldn't otherwise support the $2 billion capex that Stibnite has. And it's going to be a long process to raise that capital, get that mine producing ore. That's going to be a 3+ year process. If you can utilize modular processing and go after some of these high grade, smaller scale projects, you're going to be able to bring critical metals to the market faster. So I think establishment of critical metals hubs, number one, and permitting, number two, are two things that are critical. So from our perspective, that's what we are working on. We've got a high grade resource. We've got stibnite up to 50%. We're in the lower 48. We are on federal land, so permitting is always going to be an issue, but we are looking at land to acquire, so private land, where we can put a modular processing facility on and look to get into production sooner rather than later.
Modular processing, I think I understand what that is, but please elaborate on that. It seems like a quick solution as opposed to 5, 10, 15 years to build a mine.
Exactly. So you're still going to go through the process of permitting a mine, but instead of going through the icky business of processing something on site, and there's a perception that the processing of critical metals involves a bunch of deleterious metals that are going to have a negative environmental impact. And most of these projects, Ellis, are located on federal lands, either Forest Service or BLM. And these lands are not just for commercial use. A lot of it is for recreational and other uses, not just commercial uses. So you have to balance what you do on federal land from a mining perspective with these other uses of the land. So if you can take the messy part of processing these ores and move that off-site, I think that is going to allow the government to get their heads around reducing the timelines to actually permit the extraction of the ore, which would be by underground or open pit methods, depending on the type of deposit that you have. And if you've got high grade ore, you can move that ore off site to process it. And if it's high enough grade, you can move it a fairly significant distance. For instance, when antimony was processed at the Horse Heaven project, all of that high grade ore was pulled off of the mountain using just open pit trenches, and it was processed in Salt Lake City over a day's drive away from our project. And it would have been processed at the old Asarco smelter. Using a modular facility, you could locate it closer, and the capital cost is going to be much lower. And we're just exploring different options for some of these modular units, but they're going to be sub $50 million in capex to put them into production versus multi-billion for a smelter.
How is the Idaho Mining Association as a collective, your peers in the area, working to create a hub in Idaho for critical minerals and rare earth elements?
It's just something that we're starting to promote that concept of. I can tell you the Idaho Mining Association, and they're having their big conference at the end of the month in Boise. It's going to be very well attended, and critical metals definitely will be a subject of conversation, and people are starting to talk quite a bit about this. You've seen the American Tungsten. They doubled on Friday in valuation, and they've got a little underground mining operation called the IMA mine. That's tungsten. That's not antimony, but it's a critical metal. So you're seeing these things run and run hard. It's a good time to be getting exposure from an investment point of view in these metals. I can tell you our stock was up. I think we probably traded 170 million shares yesterday, 1.8 billion out. But we were up over 55% in one trading day. So we're in the right place at the right time.
Craig, thanks for the update. I hope everything goes well in Washington, and I expect to speak with you again very soon.
Looking forward to it, Ellis.
I've been speaking with Craig Lindsay, CEO of U.S. Operations for Resolution Minerals, trading on the ASX as RML and in the U.S. on the OTCQB as RLMLF. To learn more about the company and its flagship Horse Heaven project in Idaho, visit resolutionminerals.com. Craig, thanks for joining me today. We'll be following your progress closely here on the Ellis Martin Report and Money Talk Radio.
Hey, really appreciate you having me, Ellis, and it's great to reconnect. Fantastic to chat with you.